you have to be willing to watch a little bit of violence to watch a Riley coach team after those Laker years, certainly with the Knicks. I mean, that was what he was encouraging with this team and would kind of be a staple of the way he coached the team. One of the chapters in the book is named Knock Michael Jordan to the Floor, because that was what he ordered his team to do defensively after a game where Michael just basically had his way with the Knicks defense. And, and Michael knew it was coming. He used the word decapitate as far as what he was concerned would happen in the next game. And Michael went nowhere near the basket. Michael, of all people, Michael was not afraid of anything. But on that particular day, if you go back and watch that game, it's very clear he wanted nothing to do with going to the basket, and it was one of the worst shooting performances he'd ever had in the playoffs in his career to that point, because I think he took 25 shots and only 3 of them came from inside the paint. He wanted nothing to do with the Knicks defense at that time.
Let me read from that chapter. I actually had that page pulled. It's page 45. Here's a quote. One of you is going to step up, knock Michael Jordan on the floor, and not help him up. We can't show him deference just because who he is or how good he is. Not anymore. You can achieve whatever you want in life, but no one, especially Michael Jordan, is going to give it to you. You have to take it. Michael isn't just going to play poorly. You have to force him to play that way, close quote. That's from Pat Riley. So how did he get the rest of the Knicks to buy into the toughness that he felt was necessary to compete at that level?
He did some kind of insane stuff, man. And I mean, it comes across in the book, I hope. But, in that matchup in particular, what he did, that was game 6 that he said that to them during the Bulls-Knicks series in 92. So this was Riley's first year with the Knicks, a year after the Knicks had been swept when they had a previous management in. So Riley had his film coordinator basically put a play that had happened from the previous year's playoffs, where there's that famous play where Michael kind of throws that shoulder shiver on Starks and Oakley, and they both move left, and Michael actually used it as a way to turn to his right and come down the baseline, and he jams all over Patrick Ewing. I'm pretty sure Michael has said it's his favorite dunk of all time because it was on one of his good friends in Patrick. But Riley showed that play in the locker room to the Knicks on a loop for between 5 and 10 minutes. And he's just showing them get dunked on by Michael Jordan for 5 or 6 minutes. And they're just sitting there in silence watching it. Like, what are they supposed to do? And Riley basically says, "This makes me sick." And then he launched into that speech that you just read from. So he would basically show them stuff to charge them up where no one had an opportunity to speak. There were no rebuttals. It's just, you sit and watch this until it makes you as sick as it makes me. So he made them do that. And then I think the next year, there was a game where he was furious that they had dropped a game to a really lowly Pistons team that was not very good, that was on a 7-game losing streak. And so the next game they were going to play the Blazers, who were very, very good during that era, maybe the best offense during that season. He was just ridiculing them as they were shooting around in the morning. They were in layup lines, and every time a player would come by and take a layup, he'd say, "Soft, soft, soft." He's yelling at his guys. And so he's doing that at the morning practice. And then when they come in for the game that night, for pregame, normally when Riley would give a speech, he just has them sit down. He's got another tape queued up for him, courtesy of the film coordinator. And he'd had the film coordinator basically splice stuff together from PBS specials, from news accounts of car crashes and Rams headbutting each other. Just to basically, he didn't say anything for a pregame talk. He did not utter a word. He just showed them car crashes and Rams headbutting each other and then walked out of the locker room. And so Doc Rivers said, we watched it, and I'm sitting there watching Anthony Mason's eyes just light on fire watching this, and you really got the impression that somebody might die that night because of the way that we were going to go out and defend, because that was kind of the messaging that he charged us up with, was the idea that we had to go out and play that way. And so it was just a guy that wasn't wired right, or was wired in a way that just, was not in keeping with what the NBA wanted. And I think it speaks volumes about why the league was so quick to want to get rid of the way they played basketball and changing the rules all of a sudden within a year or two.
That part of it was really fascinating to me too, where you were talking about the commissioner's office and the Knicks being the team of New York, but also being right down the street from the league office. How did they find that space of being able to be as tough as they could, and still be allowed to do it, even in front of David Stern. Like, they're doing it in games in front of him. So how were they able to pull that off without the league really coming down on them?
Well, the league did, and the Knicks were always thinking, Doc Rivers at one point called them anti-Nick rules. Doc was a starting point guard for them for about a year and a half before he tore up his knee with an ACL. But the league was on top of them about all of it because they were constantly involved in big fights. There was a big fight in '93 where Greg Anthony leaves the bench in street clothes and sucker punches Kevin Johnson, which was actually really the second part of a big brawl between those two teams, the Suns and the Knicks. And then you've got the one that happened with the Bulls in '94 in the playoffs, and that first year that Michael was gone, that Derek Harper basically suplexes JoJo English, and it happens right in front of David Stern, who's sitting maybe 3 rows up at half court with his wife, of all people. And so he just has a completely mortified look on his face. And you could even tell looking at his face that the rules were going to change, that, in that instance, a couple people from the Knicks fell into the laps of people that were sitting courtside, including the teenage daughters of Bulls minority owners. And you could just kind of tell at that point, these are wealthy people that are being inconvenienced, that are getting mixed up in something that could become really scary. And, to some extent, you're probably worried about the Malice at the Palace stuff before that even happened. We're talking about a decade and a half before that even happened, what was happening in Chicago. And keep in mind, the league is also trying to hold on to whatever they can after Michael has left the game to go play baseball. So they're petrified of all of it, and that forced the rules to change. But the league was already, at least from the Knicks' perspective, they already had the Knicks on watch, basically, because the Knicks were a team that the league didn't want to be perceived as being too comfortable and too friendly with because of, there were all the allegations and accusations about Patrick Ewing in the draft lottery in '85. So the Knicks kind of felt like the league was constantly trying to show the rest of the league, we're not too friendly with the Knicks. We're not overly friendly with them. So who knows how much truth there was to that. But the Knicks gave me example after example after example of things that the league would come down on them for that was not a big deal. The idea of the starting lineup introductions running too long. The idea of them showing replays too many times on the Jumbotron when a referee made a call that might have been wrong. The league would jump down their throat about it, and the Knicks were frustrated by that because they were saying, are you really going to tell us that you do this with Utah, or do you just mostly do this with us because your office is right down the street from us and you guys have more season tickets that belong to us than anybody else, that you guys are at our games every night, where you can't possibly be at the Jazz games or the Lakers games or the Clipper games or anything else. So there was a big feud between the league and the Knicks, and I don't think the Knicks won that feud when everything was said and done.
Chris Herring is my guest. His book is called Blood in the Garden. It is, if you know any basketball fan, like I was texting my brother last night, like he's not a big sports fan at all, but I think that he would dig this on a lot of different levels just because of living through it and seeing it through the eyes of people in Chicago. Go get this book, Blood in the Garden, The Flagrant History of the 90s New York Knicks. Now, Chris, you worked for 538. You were covering the Knicks over the last decade. When you were going back and watching this stuff and researching this stuff, does this feel like 100 years ago to you, considering where the game is now?
Kind of, because you look at it and you start wondering, like, could some of these people have even really fit or played in this era? And it's really funny, Laurence, because a lot of the Knicks guys, I think they actually could. It probably sounds backwards because they were playing this archaic style of defense, but, they had some skill. Like, I think because of the way we talk about the Knicks, and I tried to make them, more of a 3D portrait than this in the book, Ewing could fit in any era. I mean, like, the guy was a guy that was just spot on from 20 feet out back then. He could have easily backed up another 2 or 3 feet and shot threes and was probably the best 7-foot jump shooter of his era. So you have him. Starks led the league in three-point shooting, and three-pointers made one year. They had Hubert Davis that led the league in percentage. They had Charles Oakley, who obviously was not athletic, but was a guy that was a great rebounder, had very good instincts. He was a good 17-foot jump shooter. Chicagoans know about that from his time with the Bulls. Mason is a guy that people compare, Draymond Green gets comparisons to Anthony Mason all the time, and was a guy that was one of the first real point forwards that we saw on a regular basis that Don Nelson used. And so he could have fit in this era. Charles Smith, and you mentioned
perfect
before,
for
a guy you kind of feel bad for, he could have really fit in this era and probably would fare a lot better than he did back then because he would clearly be a 4 or a 5. The Knicks were playing him as a 3 and asking him to guard Scottie Pippen after all the Xavier McDaniel stuff. So I actually think a lot of those guys could have fit perfectly. And, well, maybe not perfectly, but I think they could have fit in this era. They wouldn't have been a better team now than they were back then. But it's weird that for how archaically we think about that team, they could have fit a little bit in this era. I think more than people give them credit for.
Man, I really love the book. I enjoyed it. I will say that I was triggered with the 94 series triggered me in reading it because I still am a huge Scottie Pippen fan. And it felt like he was so close to getting the validation that he clearly needs without Jordan being there. And reliving the Hugh Hollins call was rough for me as I was reading this.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that's still tough for him. And I mean, it's interesting, too, because I obviously wanted to include the players' perspectives. I talked to Phil for the book. And, as much as I could, where they were willing to comment, I talked to the referees about the calls. And Hugh Hollins passed away. But, it's interesting because you basically have his whole crew that was with them saying, like, he botched that call. And it's not that they said it later. It's that they said it like a month or two later. It was not that far removed. You never hear referees kind of take out one of their own guys like that. So I think there's something to be said for the fact that that's still a very controversial call. Phil, to his credit, and I think, I give him credit for saying this, whether actually it's true or not, he basically says, look, it was the wrong call. It certainly altered the series, but he basically said, I will say I don't think that we were better than the Knicks that year. We had problems as a team. We really missed Michael. We, frankly, overachieved given how much we were missing Michael. The Knicks were the better team. They deserved to move on. And in fairness, too, the Knicks did drop Game 6, so the Bulls did get a chance to go 7 with them. That did not ruin the series necessarily. Obviously, it gave the Knicks a big leg up. But I did think it was interesting that Phil basically said the better team won. We had that one taken from us, but the better team won ultimately in the series. But that call, yeah, I guess I was alive during that era. I don't know that I knew what I was seeing or if I was even watching the series. I was probably watching cartoons. But that play, I understand still why it's controversial because I don't know if you call that one today.
Before I let you go, and I don't want to give too much of the book away because I want people to go buy Blood in the Garden, the flagrant history of the 1990s New York Knicks. Can you tell the Riley in Hawaii story?
Sure. Probably a perfect story to tell for your audience. So, keep in mind, we're talking about Charles Smith and, 93, the fact that the Knicks take a 2-0 lead and then they end up losing the 2-0 lead. There's the whole Jordan gambling story that comes out in the New York Times in the middle of the series. It's really hotly contested. The Bulls tie the series. They get to Game 5, and then Charles Smith happens. The Bulls win that series. They win the second title, actually a third title. So all that happens. But then, Riley wants to get away just because it's been a long season. The Knicks had just put together a 60-win year, and they don't get it done. They had a perfect opportunity to take Michael out. They don't get it done. Riley takes his family on vacation to Hawaii. They are there. It's Pat Riley. He's got, he's the highest paid coach in the league. He's still the most accomplished coach in the league, even more than Phil with 4 championships from those Lakers years. He's in a suite. He has the presidential suite at this hotel, the highest one up at the hotel, the resort. And 2-3 days into his trip, he gets a call from the front desk urgently saying, Mr. Riley, we're so sorry. Something really, really unexpected has come up. We're going to need you to vacate your room. But no trouble, because obviously it's a huge inconvenience for you. So as long as you guys can kind of go down to the beach or go get something to eat, it's on us. We'll move your luggage for you and your family's luggage for you. And Riley's kind of trying to talk them out of it. Like, I paid a lot of money for this suite. What could possibly force me to move at this point? And they're saying, we can't really get into that, but we trust us. We'll move everything. We'll make it very painless for you. Just enjoy yourself for an hour and a half. And we'll have you guys moved, and you guys will be comfortable in the second nicest suite we've got. We're very sorry. So Riley takes his family down to the water and, into the pool or whatever. They do that for maybe the better part of 30, 45 minutes. But Riley is really agitated by this. He keeps looking up at his suite in the balcony, trying to figure out if he can get a sense of why they're moving him, if something happened, was there something wrong with the room that he didn't know about? And finally, he looks up about an hour later, and he sees the doors to his balcony fly open, and it's Michael Jordan standing there in a bathrobe. And so I just kind of felt like it was the perfect imagery to kind of explain that, Riley and the other 24, 25 teams in the league at the time were all looking up at Michael. And even when you're trying to get away for a vacation, when Michael's already kind of, stuck his sword in you and killed you, that you're still looking up at him ultimately. And I thought it was a really good segue to get into the 94 season, because then Michael goes away and gets into baseball. But that story is one that still stands with Riley and sticks with Riley all these years later.
It's so great, and it also illustrates Michael Jordan's level of petty, which we have all become accustomed to seeing on display. Chris, congratulations on the book, man. It's awesome.
Thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about it and for reading it. I really appreciate you, Laurence.
No doubt about it. Chris Herring, his book, even as a Bulls fan, you will enjoy it. Blood in the Garden. Go pick it up. It's a lot of fun, and there are a ton of Bulls stories in here. Bulls past and present stories in here. You will enjoy it. Go support Chris wherever you get your books. Blood in the Garden is worth your time.